Welcome to the 28th episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. Today we're going to be taking a look at UFC 262. We're going to talk about most of the fights from the main card, and I'm going to give you my opinions on the fights themselves, and then I'm going to touch base on what is next for all of these guys. Then after that, we're going to take a look at some other news inside of the UFC, because there were a lot of fights that were booked, a lot of important fights too, that were booked last week. So I'm going to touch base on all of those. Then we're going to end by looking at next week's fight card, which is Cody Garbrandt versus Rob Font in your main event. And that should be a very good card, so we're going to touch base on that. So to start off, obviously, we're going to start at the main event of UFC 262. This was one of my favorite fights of this year. The first round could go down for round of the year so far. It was a great round. We saw early. We had knockdowns. We had Michael Chandler, almost finished that fight. But before that, we had Charles Oliveira on the back of Michael Chandler. He was able to take the back. And Michael Chandler, very impressive here because he was able to get out of that position, I should say, because Charles Oliveira is a high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and there's a chance that he is the best BJJ practitioner in the UFC right now. I know Damian Maia might be able to take that, but he's on his way out. So Charles Oliveira is the new age. I shouldn't say new age, but he's a top tier practitioner of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu regardless. And for Michael Chandler to be able to explode and get out of a bad position with someone of that high level is very impressive. And for Charles Oliveira to be able to withstand some of the power punches that Michael Chandler landed early in the first round, and he was able to get this fight to the second round, and then obviously in the second round, 10, 20 seconds in, Charles Oliveira landed a very impressive hook, and it was very fundamental. That's the one thing about Charles Oliveira and his stand-up is he was very fundamentally strong. Michael Chandler came in and he left himself exposed. There was a second where he didn't, have a lot of head movement and he didn't have his hands up. And, just a slip in fundamentals for a split second by Michael Chandler, and Charles Oliveira was able to take advantage of that. And that is something that many wrestlers and really just grapplers in general aren't able to do and really take advantage of mistakes made by strikers on the feet. And Michael Chandler made a mistake, and Charles Oliveira capitalized on that. And then once he landed that big right hook, Michael Chandler wasn't out. It wasn't a flush KO, but Michael Chandler was knocked down. And then Charles Oliveira immediately saw the blood in the water, and he had great finishing instincts. He was in his face, and he pressured Chandler, and he never gave Chandler a second to recover, and he eventually finished that fight. So the striking of Oliveira was the most surprising thing to me in this fight. I knew that Chandler, everybody knows that Chandler is so fast, powerful, explosive, and that he is a great wrestler too. So for Charles Oliveira to be able to come in and win this fight on the feet shows that he is a better striker than a lot of people gave him credit for. And, I would be included in that. I think I overlooked his striking. Coming into this, I said both guys were, better strikers than they were being made out to be, and I believe that. But I didn't think Charles Oliveira was as good of a striker as he showed, even though I thought he was a little bit underrated. But he was being underrated in his striking way more than I alluded to. So respect to Charles Oliveira for that. And the big standout to me in this is that Michael Chandler, this is going to sound weird, but the biggest thing that stood out to me was that Michael Chandler is that good at lightweight. Because that first round was tremendous from Chandler. Two judges scored it a 10-8. I didn't see a 10-8. I saw a 10-9. I have trouble scoring a 10-9 when I have trouble scoring a 10-8, when Oliveira is on the back of Chandler. I don't, because that is such a dominant position, and you score 10-8s by being dominant, and Michael Chandler was being dominated for a minute. So, I have trouble scoring that a 10-9 when Oliveira had some very strong moments. So, yeah, I have trouble scoring that a 10-8. So, but still, nonetheless, very impressive round by Michael Chandler, and he proved that he is one of the best at lightweight. But Charles Oliveira has shown that he has the heart to push through that and was able to find a finish when it was presented. So, as of right now, Charles Oliveira is the UFC lightweight champion, and he has a very exciting future because Charles Oliveira is going to have some fun fights here in the future. Regardless of who is next for Charles Oliveira, it's going to be a fun fight. And if he can get 2 or 3 title defenses, against the likes of the types of fighters that are going to be coming up next, it's going to, show that he is a all-time great lightweight. He has that potential here based off his skill and the skill of the opponents that he will be facing. So, what is next for Charles is the question. And for me, I think it's pretty obvious, and I think most people would agree with this. I'm not pulling something out of left field for this. I think it's the winner of Poirier versus McGregor, especially if Dustin Poirier wins. If Poirier wins, he would be the most overqualified title challenger in a long time. Him and when Robert Whittaker gets his next title opportunity. But as of right now, if Dustin Poirier, with the wins he's had, and since his last loss, a win over Hooker and 2 wins over McGregor, talking as if he wins this fight, which this fight, I'm not overlooking this and saying Poirier will win. I'm saying that in this situation, if Poirier wins, he would be billed as, right now he's being billed as the best lightweight in the world outside of Khabib by many people. Many people believe that. So for Oliveira, if he is able to get in there with Dustin Poirier, assuming Poirier wins, he has an opportunity to really cement himself as the best lightweight in the world. If you beat Dustin Poirier, there's no one going to be arguing that you're not the best active lightweight in the world. People are always going to say Khabib. And that's understandable because it's the same thing we've seen with GSP. When you walk away at the top, you're going to have the next generation of guys. They're going to constantly be compared to that fighter. And that's no fault of Charles. That conversation is always going to be there with the lightweight champion for a long time is, well, Khabib. That's always going to be talked about. So, that's something that I almost don't even want to consider here because, there's no point in comparing someone who's retired, and I don't think Khabib is coming out of retirement anytime soon. There's potential that he does, but I don't want to, sit here and talk about Khabib versus, or Khabib versus, anyone because he is retired. So we'll move on from that. But if Oliveira can go out there and get a shot against Poirier and beat Poirier, there's not going to be a single person questioning whether he's the best in the world, because I saw a lot of people saying he wasn't, even though he was the champ. A lot of people are saying Poirier beats him, and that's a reasonable take. I'm not going to crucify anyone for saying that they think that Poirier is the best active lightweight on the world. That's a good take, and I think the only conversation is between Charles and Dustin for active guys. So I'm not going to, sit here and, debate that because it's not that important. And I think we eventually see that fight sometime down the road. And if Oliveira can get that fight and win that fight, he's putting himself in a very good position. And on the flip side of that coin, if McGregor wins, then, that's the biggest money fight. That's the biggest fight you can get in terms of growing your fan base. And there will be so many eyes on that fight. And that is a fight that Oliveira is going to have a good chance in. Oliveira is so good on the ground, and we've seen that Conor is, a little bit weaker on the ground, and that's as of no fault to Conor almost because Khabib is so good and he was exposed by Khabib. But, Oliveira is one of those guys who is a next-level grappler. So for that fight, I think Oliveira would be favored by many hardcore fans. The lines in Vegas are always going to represent Conor as a favorite because they get so much action. But what I mean by that is so many people bet on Conor that he's going to always be the favorite so that Vegas can cover if Conor wins. But if you talk to someone, inside of the UFC or that watches regularly, they'll probably tell you that Oliveira will win that fight. And, Oliveira, like I said earlier, if he can beat McGregor or Poirier, he's adding to a legacy. He's adding to, how he is perceived by many fans. So Oliveira is going to have a big opportunity here in his next fight. And the dark horse, I think, is Justin Gaethje because I don't think they're going to make that fight, but it's a possibility because you never know what happens in MMA. If something happens that it's not McGregor, if it's not Poirier, it'll likely be Gaethje, If something happens that Poirier goes out there, for example, beats McGregor, but then Poirier gets injured in that fight and has to, take 6 months to a year off, that would be a situation where Justin Gaethje could come in and steal that opportunity. So I think that Gaethje's name is not out of this yet, but this is something that I don't imagine will happen, barring any unforeseen circumstances. But Gaethje is still one of those guys who a lot of people hold in high regards, and understandably so. But I have a hard time giving Gaethje this shot when his last fight was a loss, albeit to Khabib, but he also has a loss against Poirier on his record. And stylistically, we saw Khabib really, looked very dominant on the ground against Gaethje, and he was able to submit him very easily. Now we have to ask the question, was that because Gaethje is bad at jiu-jitsu, or is that because Khabib is so good? Both can be true, and one can be true. And the one that we know for a fact is that Khabib is very good on the ground, and he's very good at jiu-jitsu. So I think early on, a lot of people would. But on the flip side, we saw Oliveira get touched up a little bit by Chandler. And if Gaethje, is able to connect like Chandler was able to connect, do we see a situation where Oliveira doesn't get out of that first round? And I think that's a question that we need to ask ourselves. Excuse me, my bad. But, so that could be billed as a very interesting match, but I just don't see it happening as of right now. But, that could be a fight that we do see sooner rather than later, especially if Gaethje can go out there and get a win against another top guy. And speaking of what's next for Gaethje, that also comes in line with our next question is what is next for Michael Chandler. So Michael Chandler did prove that he is one of the best in the world. He looked that good, but we saw some flaws in his game. Whether that is, some slight fundamentals, errors in boxing that can be improved upon. But he looked a little tired after the first round. That was another issue. And I don't know if that, that I don't want to say that he was tired, but he did appear tired. He could have went and been on that stool for a minute, and he could have been fine coming into the second round, and his cardio could have went 5 rounds. But that's just something to think about. But I'm not going to sit here and say, Chandler has bad cardio, because that is something that, we didn't necessarily see. But that is a possibility. So I don't want to look past that, but at the same time, I don't want to overanalyze his cardio. And that the same exact thing can be said with his chin. I don't want to overanalyze his chin, but at the same time, it's hard to look past because he was finished in that fight. And it was just a fundamental hook that caught him right on the chin. Great timing that could have played into it. But he was also dropped by Pitbull on a strike that, didn't seem that impactful. And albeit that was on the back of the head a little bit. But that is something that, does concern me with Chandler. And I might go back and look at a couple more Chandler's fights recently. I know in the past his fights with Eddie were wars. So I'm not saying historically over Chandler's career that he has had a poor chin. I'm saying as of late, So if there's any pushback on that, don't give me a fight from 10 years ago and say, oh, look at this, or 5 years ago. I'm saying as of late, we have seen a more suspect chin from Chandler, and that could be apart from aging and being in said wars with the likes of Eddie Alvarez and others. So that's just something to think about with Chandler, but from speed, strength, he has all of those factors, and he can still achieve his goal of being a lightweight champion. Charles Oliveira was able to achieve that goal on Saturday night, but Michael Chandler still has an opportunity to achieve that same goal. So, what is next for Chandler? I said already, his path aligns with Justin Gaethje's. I think that's a good fight for both guys. I think that Gaethje, if you beat Chandler, you just beat a guy who challenged for the title. That gives you some rub to fight for the title next. And if you're Chandler, if you go out there and beat Gaethje, Gaethje is someone who is looked at in high regards. So, that gets you back in that title picture. And they're out, well, I shouldn't say in the title picture. They're in the title picture, but in the title, actual talk to fight for the title next. But outside of that for Chandler, there's going to be a lot of movement in these rankings. Tony Ferguson is at 5. Chandler's at 4. They both lost. Oliveira's at 3. He's going to move up to champ. So we're going to be looking at Poirier and Gaethje are going to stay at 1. Oliveira, like I just said, moves to champ. Now you have an opening at 3. So what do you do at 3? Does Michael Chandler move up from 4 to 3, even though he just lost? Because at 5, you have Tony Ferguson. So Tony Ferguson's not moving up. You moved Darusch up from 9 to 3. So these rankings, when they come out, I'm going to be very interested in where everyone is lined up in these rankings. Do you move Conor from 6 to 3? Does Conor go above Chandler? I think Conor's going to move up a little bit because, there's going to be 2 spots that are really going to open in those top 5 because you have one automatic opening because Oliveira is moving to champ status, so that opens one spot in the top 5 rankings because there was no champ before that. And then Tony Ferguson is at 5, so he's definitely going to drop out of the top 5. We'll talk more about Tony in a second here. And then you have Conor at 6, RDA at 7. Do we see Conor and RDA both move into that top 5? So there's so many questions. How high does Darusch rise? Because he's going to rise. But what do we do with Hooker? Because he's coming off losses to 2 premier lightweights in Chandler and Poirier. How high does Islam go? Because Islam, he's booked against an unranked guy, but he's got to win over Dober, who just entered the rankings at 15. Gillespie looked good. Kevin Lee is still in the rankings. Does he drop out because he's moving to 70? Ferreira just lost. So I'm interested in what's next for these lightweight rankings. We're going to see, probably the whole division is going to be ranked differently. And there's going to be someone enter the rankings, at least one. How far does Tony fall? Today is Monday as of the recording this, so the rankings drop tomorrow. So I might put out a tweet or a TikTok talking about these rankings because I am very interested. And a lot of people say the rankings don't matter, but the rankings matter in a way where rankings matter when booking fights because it's tough to get guys to accept fights based off their rankings. Title fights into the UFC, it doesn't matter. But in terms of getting, very little guys will look at their ranking of being number 3 and, take a fight against the guy ranked at 10. So that's just something to think about in terms of booking fights, that these rankings do matter in that sense. So I'm excited to see where these come out. And that bridges us right to our next fight, which is Tony Ferguson versus Benil Darusch. First off, the large portion of this segment is going to be spent talking about Tony Ferguson because I think there's more to talk about there. But first, we're going to start with Benil Darusch. Now, in a minute here, I'm going to go into talking about Tony, and I don't think Tony is the same fighter, but I don't want that to come across as I am, taking anything away from Benil, because I was very impressed by Benil. A lot of the things he did were very fundamentally sound and, great jiu-jitsu. So I think that is something that, he didn't beat Tony by catching him and Tony has a fading chin. He outpositioned Tony. There was a lot of times where Tony created scrambles and Benil Dariush won those scrambles. So from a fundamental grappling standpoint, Benil Dariush looked incredible, and that is undisputable. But with that being said, Tony Ferguson doesn't look like the same fighter one bit. The look in Tony's eyes, his body looks not as strong. And I think now Tony Ferguson could be working harder now than he was in his prime. And I don't want to sit here and say Tony needs to retire, because Tony is putting in the work, but he's just not seeing the rewards. This isn't a situation where a guy is old and his body is, I shouldn't say his body isn't breaking down, but we have seen a clear decline in Tony. In the Gaethje, and I don't want to say Gaethje broke him. I think this is a result of aging. I think when in that Gaethje fight, I think it was more competitive than these last two, in the sense because he landed that big uppercut in the second round and he had Gaethje hurt, and there was a sense where there was a moment where you were like, oh, Tony's going to win this fight. Against Oliveira, there was never a moment outside of the first 30 seconds that I was like, oh, Tony has a chance. Same thing with Dariush. So, and to me, you can tell a lot by the look in Tony's eyes. It sounds weird, but there were moments in that fight where Tony's laying on the bottom going for a Darce, and it looks like he's just trying to get that Darce because he doesn't have anything else to do. And this is tough for me to say. I hate criticizing Tony because Tony is one of my favorite fighters. So I don't want to sit here and sound like a hater, but I also don't want to see Tony continue to fight if that's the outcome we're going to keep seeing. And if you can't beat Benil Dariush, it wasn't even close. If you can't come close with Dariush, are you going to beat Oliveira? Are you going to beat Poirier? Are you going to beat Gaethje? Are you going to beat Chandler? Are you going to beat Hooker? Are you going to beat Islam? I don't think so. I think if Tony wants to continue, I think he needs to move to 170. And I say that because the cutting weight and aging at the same time is not a good combo, I don't think. So I think that, being in a situation where you can not have to worry so much about the weight, that could help his performance, and it's worth a shot. If not, I don't want to see him continue at 170. I think the only potential thing here I don't want to see him continue at 155. If the one thing that would intrigue me at 155 is if Conor loses, Tony and Conor would be a fight that I would be interested in because Tony wouldn't have, I think if Conor loses, people are going to be having the same conversation about Conor as we are about Tony. So people are going to be saying Conor needs to hang it up. Right now, people are saying Tony needs to hang it up. And that's if Conor loses, obviously. But with that being said, if you pair them up against each other, have one guy get back on track in the winning column, and I think that would help the winner. And for the loser, it would really, kind of speed up the process of retirement. So I think Tony needs to keep his eye on that fight because he could still get that payday with Conor. So hopefully, I don't think that's out of the question, and I think that is something to think about. If I'm Tony, I'm not booking a fight till after that because that is too big of an opportunity. So that is just something to think about. And for Tony, for Dariush, what's next for Dariush? Let's see how high he rises in the rankings. I've seen RDA and I've seen Chandler as two names getting tossed around. I think those are both interesting options. I think Chandler versus Dariush would be fun. a lot of fun. And the same can be said about RDA. So either one of those guys, I guess it depends with what are we doing with Chandler. Because I think if Chandler goes Gaethje, then RDA and Darusch seems like a layup to me. But other than that, I think those are the two names as of right now that we can see Darusch against, and then getting a win over either of those guys pushes you very close to that title opportunity. So that's just my thought. I don't think we see Darusch against Gaethje. I think that is, those are two Ali Abdelaziz managed fighters, so I don't think we see that matchup right now. And it sounds like both those guys are friends. Darusch told the story about how Gaethje helped him grocery shop for when him and his wife were going through something. I don't know all the details, but it sounds like Gaethje and Darusch have a very good relationship, and I wouldn't imagine them fighting unless they're fighting each other for the belt, similar to Burns and Usman. So that's just something to think about. So I think the two big names right now are Chandler versus RDA, and don't be surprised if you're Ali. Ali could make this play where he gets Gaethje, Chandler, RDA, Darusch, kind of line strategically getting, because getting Gaethje that fight against Chandler, then that gets RDA, or that gets Darusch fight with RDA. So that's just something to think about there. And on the flip side of that, if you get Gaethje a fight where, if you get Darusch booked against RDA, that pretty much forces the UFC's hand of Chandler versus Gaethje if they want to fight soon. So that's just something to think about that I think could be a very interesting talking point moving forward. And then the next fight we're going to touch on, Caitlyn Chukagian versus Viviane Arjuna. This was, I don't want to say a robbery. I scored it for 2-1 Arjuna in terms of rounds. I understand the scoring of 2-1 Chukagian. I'm not going to go against that. I personally don't have that. I don't think that is the most popular scorecard. I think the most popular scorecard is 2-1 Arjuna. So, but with that being said, there was a 30-27 for Chukagian, and that might be the worst scorecard I've ever seen in my whole entire life. So let's get our stuff together here, judges. And I just wanted to point that out because that is absolutely terrible. And stock really rose here for Arjuna, I think, because she was, I don't want to say a prospect, but you kind of get what I'm saying here. She was the 7th ranked fighter, and she was fighting this number 2 ranked fighter, and she arguably won. With that being said, she's not in a position to where she can fight for a title right now, because it doesn't look like she had 3-round cardio. So if you don't have 3-round cardio, you don't have 5-round cardio. I think that's a pretty simple assessment. So I think Arjuna has championship potential, but I don't think that she has reached. I don't think she's come close to that yet. So she can keep working on that. And then for Chukagian, she's in a tough spot because I don't think we see that Shevchenko rematch soon. I think she's got to win some fights before we get there. She's in a not a great spot. And I don't think we see the Andrade rematch either, really, right now. You've got Murphy, Jennifer Maia, Calvillo, Calderwood. I don't know how they're going to match this up. This is going to be interesting to see. A couple of these are booked. I know Calderwood is booked against one of them. I think it's Calderwood versus Murphy. I'm not 100% sure. I'll check on that real quick. But either way, that doesn't make too big of an effect on Chukagian because she's going to have to keep taking out some more of these top contenders, and she's almost, in a gatekeeper spot, I think. Yeah, they've got Calderwood versus Murphy. What were they doing with Jennifer Maia? I can never remember some of these bookings. Sorry about that. So, Shevchenko is really cleaning out this division, and that makes it tough for people who have already lost to Chukagian to advance their careers forward. So, I think Chukagian's in that spot a little bit. I think Jennifer Maia's in that spot. Oh, we got Maia versus Jessica Ai. Okay. Yeah, I think that just puts fighters in, for Andrade, Chukagian, Jennifer Maia, what are you doing next in your careers? Because I don't think anyone watched any of those fights and was like, oh, they still have a chance against Shevchenko. I don't think anyone thought that watching those fights. So they're all not in a great spot, but at the same time, they're still elite fighters in that weight class, but they're just still levels behind Shevchenko. That's not their fault. Shevchenko's just on a different level. So I think just Chukagian's probably going to have to wait for some of these outcomes to play out between Murphy, Calderwood, Maia, and I. And then maybe take a winner or loser of one of those. And, it all depends on who Valentina gets booked against next as well. That plays a factor into it. And for Arjuna, you can't really move her up in the rankings because she just lost. Jessica Ai's booked. She already beat Roxanne Modafferi. Alexa Grasso's an interesting fight. Andrea Lee, she had a good win over the weekend. That's also potential there. So I think there's some fights that make sense for Arjuna. I think that both that Andrea Lee and Alexa Grasso would make sense in a way. So that's what we could see next for her. And then moving on, possibly my favorite fight of the night, Shane Burgos versus Simbarbosa. Now, first, we'll touch on the finish first because I think that is the biggest thing that anyone's talking about from this fight. I watched a medical breakdown of this, and I don't remember the guy's name, but Chael quote tweeted it. So if you didn't see this and you want to, I'm going to talk about it quickly. But if you want to watch this video I'm about to talk about, it is quote tweeted by Chael. So go to Chael's Twitter, scroll down a little bit, you'll see it. Basically, the doctor said that Burgos was hit by a knockout shot, and basically he pretty much just toughed it out. And then his body, he was like, oh, I can't get knocked out, but he was hit hard enough to get knocked out. And then eventually his body was like, why didn't you fall? You just got knocked out. And then his body made him fall. So that was my little rehashing of the science behind that. I suggest you go watch that video because it makes a lot more sense when a doctor is explaining it than when I'm explaining it, because I am not a doctor. So, but other than that, that's something. Go watch that, and then I'm going to move on from the finish because it was crazy. It was wild. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I can't say anything here that you didn't think yourself because most people just saw that and went, oh my goodness, So that's all I can sit here and say is, oh my goodness. But, oh my goodness, did Edson Barbosa look impressive. He looked fast. His conditioning held through up until the finish. And he was throwing with high output. And Barbosa throws with high output. He's also putting a lot behind his strikes. When he throws a leg kick, he's throwing leg kicks with bad intentions. Same with body kicks. They're all 100%. All 100% for Barbosa. And he looked quick with them. He looked powerful with all the strikes. Hands too, quick and powerful. That's what my note here. Quick and powerful. That is Barbosa. And at 145, he's been great at 145. I think he's 3-0 at 145. That's what he said. But I remember he lost a decision that was I'm pretty sure he lost against Ige in a not so great decision. So that's something that is still there. Yeah, he lost to Ige at featherweight. But other than that, no, he's 2-0 at featherweight, 2-1 at featherweight with the loss to Ige that the majority of people saw and think he won. So, but with that being said, I've said here for a long time, probably since I started this podcast. And every time I talk about the featherweights, I say we pretty much have a handful of guys, those guys being Volkanovski, Holloway, Ortega, Yair, Zombie, Cater, and Zabit. I pretty much mention those guys, and then I say, hey, there's a big drop-off after that. But I think Barbosa has, the skill to get in there with and be mentioned with the likes of those guys. I think that the list of guys that I mentioned a couple months ago, that was, back in December, that was, strict. That was, a strict line and a strict drop. But then we saw Cater get beat up pretty bad by Holloway, which happens. There's nothing to be ashamed about. It happens, especially when you're going up against Max. Ask Ortega. It's not the end. You still got stuff left. Josh Emmett has looked very good, but he is out until I think he was going to attempt a return in 2021 because of his injury, but that is, not sure if we're going to see Emmett in 2021. We might have to wait until 2022 with that injury. Arnold Allen has looked very good. Dan Ige has looked very good. Edson Barbosa has looked very good. Like I just said, Chikadze looked very good. Yusuf hasn't looked bad. Bryce Mitchell hasn't fought in a while. So this featherweight division is obviously stacked. And the question is, what is next for Barbosa? He's going to skyrocket in these rankings. When you put on I don't know if dominant is the right word, because Burgos had his moments. He landed shots, but it was never enough. And another thing about Barbosa that I like is he's playing into the meta of the UFC, which is calf kicks. He's the best at it, possibly. The only other guy, Gaethje's also very good at it. There's other guys. I don't want to just, single out those two, because there's so many others that are great at throwing calf kicks. But the thing about Barbosa and Gaethje that kind of makes them stand out is they throw with such bad intent when they're throwing leg kicks. And there's a lot of interesting fights here for Barbosa. Anything from 7. So I'll just list the names. Arnold Allen, Dan Ige, Giga Chikadze, Edson Barbosa. Pair them up, and any way you pair them, it's going to work out. Because those guys, right now, are kind of that second tier of featherweight. So pair them up. There's 4 of them. That's 2 fights. Put them on the same fight card for all I care. Whether it's Allen and Ige and Chikadze and Barbosa, hey, sounds like a lot of fun to me. Give me Ige, or we already saw Ige versus Barbosa, so maybe we don't see that rematch. But Allen versus, Barbosa sounds like a lot of fun. Ige versus Chikadze sounds like a lot of fun. I don't think any of those guys are going to... Oh, my bad. We already have the Korean Zombie versus Dan Ige, right? There's me forgetting another fight booking. Just let me double check on that. I'm like 99% sure that fight has been booked. So my apologies for going on a rant about booking Dan Ige with one of these guys. But, yep, Chan Sung Jung versus Dan Ige for 6/19. So I don't know what the date is today, but that's got to be coming up soon. But, even still, that fight's going to happen soon. We have Hakeem Dawodu is taking on Movsar Evelev. That fight is going to open up another. If Dawodu or Movsar come and look very impressive, they could put their name in the same category as those guys. Dawodu's a really fun fighter to watch. After his last fight, I was very impressed, and he's got fan favorite potential, and I talked about that on here. So, but right now, give me someone in the top 10 for Barbosa. I'm cool with Giga. I really like Giga. Giga had the first head kick KO after the creation of the Head Kick KO podcast, so I gotta like Giga for that one. But Barbosa versus Giga would be fireworks. If you like kicks, that's a fun fight. So that's a fight I would like. And another fight for Shane Burgos. I don't know how long of a recovery we're going to be seeing from him, but Shane Burgos versus Sadiq Yusuff stands out to me as another really fun fight that I'd like to see for whenever they're both ready to return. That's just something to think about because I think that would be entertaining to the highest degree. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about from UFC 262 is Jacare's arm. Jacare broke his arm. So, wishing a speedy recovery to Jacare. He seems in pretty good spirits, but that is all for UFC 262. So, we're going to move forward to some other news. What do we have for other news? The biggest piece of other news around the UFC is that we will likely be seeing Francis Ngannou versus Derrick Lewis. And it's looking like we're seeing August. This means a lot. This kind of goes to show that Jon Jones and the UFC were still on the outs against one another. Because if you're the UFC and you can't get Jon in there to fight Francis, and his biggest concern is money, that was the biggest draw. Derrick Lewis versus Jon isn't going to sell as well as Jon versus Francis. Stipe versus Jon, probably. Ooh, that has potential actually. But Stipe has to be the champion for that to have as much potential. So, but if they couldn't get Jon to step in there against Ingano, I don't know. That means that he's still on the outs. Is it because Jon's not ready? Because the pictures of Jon haven't looked great. He's looking like he added weight. Looks like he added body fat, but I don't want to sit here and clown Jon Jones for adding body fat because that might be what he was trying to do. I don't know. When you change your body that much and add on that much weight, he might still be ironing out some of those changes and making sure he's at a top level when he returns. And maybe it just wasn't the right time. Maybe he couldn't be ready in August. And if Jon can't be ready in August, that's fine. It's fine that if Jon can't be ready in August. I don't expect anyone who's not ready to fight at their top potential. If you're not ready to fight at your top potential and you need more time to prepare, I'm not going to crucify anyone for that. So I understand that 100%, and it makes sense. With that being said, it looks like Stipe is going to get the winner. So it's looking like it's going to be a while before we see Jon Jones back in the UFC octagon, unfortunately. I'm not a Jon Jones fan, but I want to see Jon Jones fight again. Not because I dislike him and I want to see him lose, but because he's one of the greatest of all time, whether you like him or not, and I want to see the greats fight. Unfortunately, we might not get that, so it's a shame. It's a shame, but that's what we're dealing with. But we are getting a redo on Francis Ngannou versus Derrick Lewis. And if that can be an entertaining fight, right the wrong of the first fight, Derrick Lewis has earned a title shot. And the nice thing here is we don't have to worry about heavyweight getting backed up again. Because there's so many guys who are putting a run together at heavyweight. Volkov has looked very good. Blades isn't too far out of it after his loss. Ciryl Gane's got some wins together. So there's some guys who are putting together cases for heavyweight title fights. And I hope for Francis to stay active. And if this is a way for Francis to stay active, then that's okay. And, that's pretty much my thoughts on that. So now I've got 5 other fights that were booked that I think are interesting. And I'm going to run through those 5. I'm just going to list them off. Then I'll take a second to talk about each of them. First fight. Paulo Costa versus Jared Cannonier, August 21st. Second fight, Derek Brunson versus Darren Till, August 14th. Thiago Santos versus Johnny Walker, September 25th. Islam Makalcha versus Thiago Moises. Didn't put the date down. My apologies. And then Mantuez Gamrat versus Jeremy Stevens on July 14th. So, first off, Costa versus Cannonier. And, maybe even love Brunson versus Till in there. Those are back-to-back weeks in August. Those are going to help us figure out this title picture at 185 because we're bunched up there, and we needed these guys to get matched up, and now they're matched up. Another booking that I don't think is official, but is being talked about is Uriah Hall versus Sean Strickland. That's another good fight at 185. And right now we're seeing Vettori versus Izzy are going to fight for the title soon. And then the thing about this is that fight is taking place in June. That is the next pay-per-view. And then we have until August, until Paulo, Cannonier, Brunson, and Till all fight. And these I think, are the right fights for all of those guys. And I'm cool with those fights. And the thing about that I like the most is if Izzy goes out there and gets a good win and wants to stay active, the only option he's going to have to get booked right away is going to be Robert Whittaker. Robert isn't going to fight again for a minute because he deserves a title shot. And if you're looking at Whittaker now, Paulo, booked. Vettori, booked. Cannonier, booked. Brunson, booked. Till, booked. Hermanson, booked. Hall, getting talked about. Gastelum, just fought. Chukagian, booked. Weidman, injured. Sean Strickland, getting talked about. Kevin Holland, moving to 170. And then Omari Akhmedov and Brad Tavares, who might be booked against each other. I don't 100% remember. But the reason I just went through everyone and if they're booked or not is because Whittaker's got no move other than sitting out and waiting for a title shot. And I'm cool with that. I'm 100% cool with that because he earned a title shot. And if Izzy wants to get another fight booked before the 14th of August, assuming he wins, he's going to have no other option than Robert Whittaker. So I think this is all going to play out well in the long run, and Whittaker's going to get the title shot he deserves as long as Izzy can win against Vettori. So for these other guys, for Costa and Cannonier, the winner is going to be in a very good spot. Brunson versus Till, the winner is going to be in a very good spot. If the winner, especially if it's Cannonier and Till who wins these, they're going to both be in really good spots to get title fights after Whittaker. If it's Costa and Brunson, we're going to have a little bit more of a discussion because they've already lost to Izzy and they both lost pretty uncompetitively, I would add. So, but that doesn't mean that you can't work your way up again and get another title fight, especially if you're Paulo and you beat Cannonier, or if you're Brunson and you beat Till. Maybe they match the winners up against each other and we have a little tournament here, If, say, Costa and Brunson both win and then, Costa and Brunson fight each other, the winner's in a really good spot for a title fight after Whittaker. Notice how I keep saying after Whittaker because I really think Whittaker is going to get this next shot, and the layout of the division is playing into that. So that is a good thing in my opinion. And then the other fights, Thiago Santos versus Johnny Walker. Not a fight I was expecting, but a fight I'm fine with. I was thinking Dominic Reyes versus Thiago Santos, Anthony Smith versus Thiago Santos, but I am 100% cool with Johnny Walker versus Thiago Santos. It really gives these guys an opportunity to get back in the win column, especially Santos. So if you can go out there and get a win over Johnny Walker, who is really Johnny Walker, I don't even know how to describe Johnny Walker, what path he's on in his career right now, because he is in such an interesting position. So I don't know with Johnny Walker. I really don't know with Johnny Walker. But I know one thing for sure, and a win over Thiago Santos is meaningful. So, and if you're Thiago Santos, Johnny Walker is a good name to get to go up against to get yourself back on track. So, good booking. Didn't see it coming, but very good booking. And just a second here. I'm pulling up Johnny Walker's recent fights because I don't remember who he's fought as of late. Win over Ryan Spann, lost to Corey Anderson and Nikola Kirkov. I'm surprised he's getting a fight this high in the rankings. I am. But that's what happens when the UFC marketing team gets behind you at one point in your career, you're going to get more opportunities regardless. Some more people know who Johnny Walker is than they know who Magomed Ankalaev is. And I don't think any hardcore fan is going to tell you that Walker's better than Ankalaev, but more people know Johnny Walker's name. I would rather see Ankalaev or Ozdemir or Anthony Smith. Well, and Anthony Smith has already fought for a title, so he's very well known. But I would like to see someone else get this shot against Santos, but I'm not mad at it, is what I'm trying to say. I'm not mad at this booking. Is it the best booking for Thiago Santos? No. Not at all. But am I mad at it? No, I'm not. And then, moving down, Islam Makalcha versus Thiago Moises. This is one that I'm not... How do I feel about this? I'm happy that Islam is staying active. Am I happy he's fighting an unranked opponent? No, because he deserves better. He went out there and dominated Drew Dober, who is now 15th in the rankings. But Islam was in a tough spot as to who is going to fight him, because the guys ahead of him are being relatively inactive in the likes of Paul Felder. Paul Felder is not going to take that fight, and I don't blame Paul Felder. Paul Felder that would be a terrible stylistic matchup with not as much, I don't want to say not as much reward. Well, beating Islam is interesting because Khabib is going to respect you for beating Islam, and for someone who's trying to get a fight against Khabib, that would be meaningful. I don't know if Paul Felder is trying to get that fight against Khabib. But at the same time, if you're looking at an audience of the fans, if you beat Islam, what has happened? One of two things happens. Either the winner gets put over as being very good, or Islam gets put as being a fraud. So you have it's interesting. It's very interesting. Is that, for example, Johnny Walker, we just talked about him. When Corey Anderson beat Johnny Walker, he didn't get put over by the fans. Johnny Walker got put down. When Chito Vera beat Sean O'Malley, Chito Vera got, put up by the fans because he just went out there and performed. Sean O'Malley, people still look at him in high regards. So one of those two things is going to happen. So I guess it's all risk reward, Like I said, these rankings are going to get a shakeup. Islam is going to move up. That's just the way it's going to work. But I think he's going to stay active. So I think it does make sense in a way. We're taking this fight in July and then getting him another fight in, August, September. August is a little too early. But see, September, October. Rather than right now, if you wanted to get him booked against, one of these other guys who are ranked up high, whether that's, I don't think we see Hooker take that fight. RDA, I don't think we see RDA take that fight. I don't think we see Darusch take that fight. The only interesting thing is Tony Ferguson. Does Tony take that fight? Should he? No. Does he? I don't know. He might. But with that being said, you go out there and beat Moises, you're still, you didn't hurt you only raised your stock. You didn't hurt anything. And you'd still be on pace to fight, in the third quarter, borderline fourth quarter of 2021. So that's something to think about in this booking. Like I said, not ideal, but I think it's going to work out. On the other hand, if this fight was booked for September, I'd be a lot more angry. But since it's July, early July, I'm cool with it. Once again, similar to the Santos booking, I'm cool with it, but I'm not ecstatic. I don't think it's as good of a booking as, let's say, Costa, Cannonier, and Brunson too. And then the last one, Gamrat versus Jeremy Stephens. This is a big opportunity for Gamrat. I almost would have liked to see Gamrat versus Islam more than Moises versus Islam. But Gamrat looked really good in his last couple fights. Jeremy Stephens moving up to 155. I'm interested to see how he does at 155. I think it's a good move because that 145 division, if you give me Jeremy Stephens against anyone in the top 15 at featherweight, I'm I'm not bullish on a Jeremy Stephens win. Looking at, he was ranked around 9 or 10. Ige, Allen, Burgos, Chigadze, Yusuf, Bryce Mitchell, Edson Barbosa. Um, Stephens would likely be the underdog in all those, even Mosvar and Dawodu. So I think a move up to 155 is good, and we'll see how good, risky. We'll see how it pays off for him, I guess. And Gamrat is a good guy to enter the 155 against, because Gamrat is highly respected by fans, and a win over Gamrat would be something meaningful. But a win over Gamrat is not he's not going in there and getting his debut against a top 15 guy who looks, unbeatable in like Islam, or something like that. And when I say unbeatable, I don't mean unbeatable overall. I mean, many people would consider Jeremy Stephens against one of those guys in the top 15 at lightweight an unwinnable fight for Jeremy. So that's kind of what I was getting at. Another piece of news to touch on, Kevin Lee moving up to 170. Something very interesting, very, very interesting for Kevin Lee at 170. Because at 155, a lot of his wins have aged very, very well. Kevin Lee is such an interesting guy. He said all of his wins when it happened, all of his losses when it happened, it looks one way. We're looking back at Kevin Lee's resume now. He's 18-16, right? Last loss, Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira is now the champion, and Kevin Lee went how many rounds? 3 rounds with him, and got caught in a guillotine. With that being said, has Charles Oliveira improved? Yes. Likely, yes. But that loss does not look as bad right now. His last win, Gregor Gillespie. Gregor looked great in his last fight. Losses to Dos Anjos. Dos Anjos came back to 155, a dominant performance over Paul Felder. Lost to Ally Quinta. Ally Quinta has been relatively inactive. Win over Barbosa. I know Barbosa has kind of seen a career resurgence and changed his fighting style, or changed weight classes. He didn't really change his style. Changed the weight class, and Barbosa has looked much better as of late, but that win for Kevin Lee has aged very well. Tony Ferguson, that loss hasn't aged very well, but at the time, Tony was in his prime, so nothing to hold against him there. And then before that was his big run to get up to that Tony fight, a win over Chiesa. That win has aged very well, even though that was not the... If I remember this correctly, because this was in 2017, it wasn't a great stoppage. Stopped by Mario Yamasaki. So not a great stoppage, but with that being said, he still won that fight. I actually kind of want to go back and rewatch that fight. And then before that, Francisco Trinaldo win. Trinaldo's still doing good in the UFC. Magomed, hopefully he's still doing good in the UFC. I know he's still in the UFC, and he has been active. He's won his last 3. Hasn't lost since 2019. So Francisco Trinaldo is doing well in the UFC still. He's only lost 2 fights since that loss to Kevin Lee. Jake Matthews, that win has aged very well. Magomed Mustafayev, who beat Rafael Fazid, who's, getting up there at 155. So, Kevin Lee's resume has aged a lot, has aged very well. Has aged very, very well. So, losses to RDA, Ally Quinta, Charles Oliveira, Tony Ferguson, Leonardo Santos, and Ally Quinta in the UFC. With the Quinta loss coming in 2014, Santos loss coming in 2015, and currently Kevin Lee is like 30, 28. So those were 5 and 6 years ago, so he was in his early 20s. Kevin Lee is not out of this, and I'm interested to see what he can do at 170. A lot of interesting fight possibilities at 170. I think Kevin Lee versus Khamzat Chimaev, personally, very fun fight. I'd love to see that fight. I know we're talking about Khamzat versus Neil Magny in the future, but if Kevin Lee's moving up to 170, then Khamzat is a very very intriguing option. We'll see what happens between Belal Muhammad and Damian Maia as well. Sean Brady, I'd be cool with that. We'll see what happens with Robbie Lawler. Li Jingliang's also up there. So there's some fun options for Kevin Lee at 170. The one thing I do want to see, though, is Kevin Lee pick a weight class and stay there. He's been up and down. Let's find a weight class, stay there. That's the one thing that I want to see from Kevin Lee. And I think he can be very good. I still think he has high potential. So I don't think Kevin Lee is as bad as many people make him out to be. And I don't think he has reached his potential yet. So we'll see what happens with Kevin Lee. And hopefully he can get some good fight bookings. And let's see if he can go out there and get some impressive wins lined up. And we are running long. So let's make this Rob Font versus Cody Garbrandt breakdown very quick. This card is looking not bad for a fight night. Not bad for a fight night. Jack Hermanson, Edmund Shabazian's on this card. Yao Xiaonan versus Carla Esparza is a very important fight at 115. That's going to have a big say in what happens next in that division. Looking at the prelims, Ben Rothwell on the prelims. That's a big name. Come on now. And Yancy Medeiros is on the prelims. So the prelims are looking not terrible. I've seen better fight night prelims, but this isn't too bad of a fight night prelim. And then the main event, Rob Font versus Cody Garbrandt. This is going to be interesting to me. And the winner of this fight, I don't really want to predict this fight because it's not going to be... No fights are easy to predict, but this one especially. Because the question is, what Cody do we see? If Cody comes out there and fights to Cody's abilities, Cody's going to win this in a dog walk. It's going to be light work. It's going to be easy. But, Rob Font is no one to scoff at. If Rob Font can find Cody's chin, and if Cody, gets into his gets into a mindset as to where he starts missing on fundamental defensive necessities, Rob Font is going to send him to the shadow realm, and that's how it goes. But if we see the Cody Garbrandt that fought Dom Cruz, Cody's going to, walk away with a 50-45, possibly a KO. And I think this isn't a knock on Rob Font, because I believe Rob Font to be very talented and very impressive and a great boxer. Tremendous boxer, one of the best boxers in that weight class. But some of the performances we've seen from Cody Garbrandt, the good ones I'm talking about, he looks unbeatable. Some nights he looks unbeatable. Do we get unbeatable or do we get very beatable? So this all comes into play as to, I know this is boring for a prediction, but it's true. Which guy do we get? If we get the one from Cody, championship Cody, he's in a very good spot to win this fight and win, more fights in the future. But if we get, chinny Cody, Rob Font is going to have an easier night. So I think, and I lean towards the fact that we're going to get a good Cody in this fight. And the reason is because he has focused more defensively. I listened to his episode on Joe Rogan. I like watching fighters on Joe Rogan, especially a Cody, because he has been through a lot in terms of his career and his health. So I did listen to the Cody Garbrandt episode on Joe Rogan, and he seemed to be focusing more defensively. And if Cody is good defensively, it's going to be a long night out for anyone. And hopefully that's the Cody we see, because that Cody is a superstar. And I like to watch great fighters. He's great. He'd be a superstar. Hopefully that's what we see. I've said it about 15 times. Hopefully that's what we see. But hopefully that's what we see. So that's the last thing I'm going to say for this. I'm excited for this week's main card especially. Main card's looking great. Prelims, some underrated scraps on the prelims. Good fight night card. And that is May 22nd. Then the week after that, we got a week off here coming up. Okay. Oh, no, we don't. What am I doing? I'm looking at the schedule, and I'm getting confusing myself here. May 22nd. Okay. Sunday. Okay. Saturday. Okay. Okay, I don't think we have a week off. Okay. Okay, sorry about that. I was looking at some few. Got excited. Started looking ahead. Sorry about that. Like I said, go follow my other social medias, Twitter, TikTok. If you like this podcast, you'll love those. MMA content throughout the week. And thank you for watching this episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. Don't forget to tune in next week, because we're going to be back at it talking about that fun fight card. And we're going to be looking forward to the next week's fight card. And I'll keep my eye on the news in the UFC, and I'll bring that news to you. So thank you for watching this episode of the Head Kick KO podcast.